The moment I saw my 78-year-old grandfather hook a tow chain to that police cruiser and drag it through the mud until it was halfway submerged in our pond, I knew two things for certain. First, we were probably all going to jail. Second, it was the proudest I'd ever been of that stubborn old man. But to understand why a respected former county judge would risk everything to sink a cop car, you need to hear the whole story, a tale about property rights, small-town corruption, and what happens when you push a patient man too far. My name is Daniel Walker. Before all this started, I was just a 32-year-old high school history teacher living a quiet life in Riverdale, Tennessee. A town so small it barely qualified for its own zip code. I'd moved back 3 years ago to help care for my grandfather, Judge Robert Walker. After my grandmother passed, everyone still called him Judge. Even though he'd retired from the bench 15 years earlier, the title had become part of his identity, like the weathered hands that had built most of our farmhouse or the steel trap mind that could recall every property line dispute in the county since 1975. The Walker family farm wasn't much by modern standards: 40 acres of rolling hills, timber, and pasture that had been in our family since 1863. My great-great-grandfather received the land grant after serving in the Union Army, and every generation since had protected it like the treasure it was. The old farmhouse sat on a gentle rise overlooking a spring-fed pond, with a winding gravel drive that connected to County Road 19. Nothing fancy, but it was home. At least, it was until Riverwood Estates decided to expand. Riverwood had started as a small development of cookie-cutter houses about a mile down the road, catering to Nashville commuters looking for country living without country prices. Within 5 years, that modest neighborhood had sprawled to over 300 homes, complete with an aggressive homeowners association run by people who thought living in the country meant having a rustic-themed mailbox while still enforcing rules about grass height measured in millimeters. The trouble began on a Tuesday in April when I came home from school to find a police cruiser parked at the entrance to our driveway. Not just any cruiser, but one with HOA enforcement stenciled along the side beneath the Riverdale Police Department logo. A heavyset man in a tan police uniform leaned against the hood, scrolling through his phone with one hand while balancing a half-eaten sandwich in the other. I slowed my truck and rolled down the window. "Afternoon, officer. Is there a problem?" The man looked up, taking his time to finish chewing before answering. His nameplate read Benson, and he had the ruddy complexion of someone who enjoyed his authority as much as his lunch breaks. "No problem," Officer Benson said, his tone suggesting that whether there was a problem was entirely at his discretion. "Just monitoring traffic for the new development access road." I glanced around, confused. "What access road?" "This is our private driveway." Benson sighed like I'd asked him to explain quantum physics. "This easement has been designated as an emergency secondary entrance for Riverwood Phase 4. HOA contracted with the Department for Security Monitoring." He gestured vaguely toward a surveyor's stake I hadn't noticed before, planted just off the edge of our gravel drive. "There must be some mistake," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "This is private property Walker family land. Has been for over 150 years. Benson's expression shifted from boredom to mild annoyance. "Look, Mr. Walker, Daniel Walker. Mr. Walker, I'm just doing my job. If you have concerns about easements or access roads, take it up with the City Planning Commission." He turned his attention back to his phone, a clear dismissal. I drove past him, my mind racing. Grandfather had never mentioned selling an easement or granting access rights. Something wasn't right, but I knew better than to argue with a cop who'd already decided I wasn't worth his time. When I reached the house, Grandfather was sitting on the front porch in his favorite rocking chair, a legal pad balanced on his knee as he worked on a crossword puzzle. At 78, Robert Walker still cut an impressive figure, tall and lean, with a shock of white hair and eyes that missed nothing. He'd served as a county judge for almost 30 years before retiring, and still volunteered at the legal aid clinic every Thursday. "There's a police officer parked at our entrance," I said without preamble. Says something about an HOA emergency access road for Riverwood. You know anything about that? Grandfather's pencil paused mid-letter. His expression hardened as he set the crossword aside. Riverwood on our land. He stood slowly, his movements deliberate. No, Daniel, I have not sold, leased, or granted any easements to that development or their association. He reached for his cane. Let's go have a word with this officer. By the time we drove back down to the entrance, Officer Benson had been joined by a sleek black SUV with Riverwood Estates Property Management emblazoned on the door. A woman in her 50s with an expensive haircut and a blazer that probably cost more than my monthly salary stood beside Benson, pointing at something on a tablet. Grandfather was out of my truck before I'd fully stopped, moving with a purpose that made his cane seem more accessory than necessity. Afternoon, he called, his voice carrying the same authority it had in his courtroom days. I understand there's some confusion about my property. The woman turned, her practiced smile never reaching her eyes. Judge Walker, what a pleasure. I'm Victoria Harrington, Executive Director of the Riverwood Homeowners Association. She extended a manicured hand. I was just explaining to Officer Benson about the easement agreement. Grandfather ignored her hand. Ms. Harrington, there is no easement agreement. This land has been in my family for generations, and I've never signed any documents granting Riverwood access rights. Victoria's smile tightened. Perhaps your memory isn't what it once was, Judge. We have all the necessary paperwork filed with the county. She swiped through her tablet and held it up, displaying a document with what appeared to be my grandfather's signature at the bottom. I watched his face carefully as he studied the document, searching for any sign of recognition or confusion. Instead, his expression settled into something I'd rarely seen pure: cold anger. That, he said quietly, is not my signature. Victoria withdrew the tablet. The county recorder's office seems to think otherwise. Judge, this easement was properly filed 3 months ago, granting Riverwood emergency access rights along your driveway. She gestured toward the stake. We'll be widening this section next week to accommodate emergency vehicles. Officer Benson will be monitoring to ensure there are no disruptions to our contractors. This is absurd, I interjected. You can't just forge documents and steal private property. Officer Benson stepped forward, hand resting casually on his belt near his taser. I'd watch the accusations, Mr. Walker. Falsely claiming forgery is a serious matter. Grandfather placed a restraining hand on my arm. We'll be taking this up with the county tomorrow. Ms. Harrington. Until then, I suggest you and Officer Benson remove yourselves from my property. Victoria's smile returned, colder than before. This access point is now designated public easement. Judge, Officer Benson has every right to be here. She checked her watch. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other matters to attend to. Officer Benson will remain to ensure the area stays accessible. As she climbed into her SUV, Grandfather called after her. You're making a serious mistake, Mr. Harrington. I may be old, but I still know how to fight. Victoria paused, door half closed. Save your energy. Judge, Riverwood always gets what it needs for community improvement, always. With that, she drove away, leaving Officer Benson smirking beside his cruiser. You heard the lady, Benson said. I'm staying right here. Official police business. Grandfather stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked back to my truck without another word. That night, we sat at the kitchen table surrounded by property deeds, surveys, and tax records dating back to the Civil War. Grandfather had kept meticulous files of every document related to the farm, organized chronologically in fireproof lockboxes. There's nothing in here about an easement, I said, rubbing my eyes after hours of searching. Not a single document granting any access rights to anyone. Grandfather nodded. His attention focused on the original land grant, yellowed with age but preserved in a protective sleeve. Of course not. Because I never signed one. He looked up, his eyes clear and determined. First thing tomorrow. We're going to the county recorder's office to see this supposed easement agreement for ourselves. The county courthouse opened at 8, and we were waiting at the door. The recorder, a nervous man named Stanley Perkins, who'd held the position for nearly 20 years, seemed uncomfortable the moment he saw my grandfather walk in. "Judge Walker," he stammered. "What a surprise. How can I help you today?" "The Riverwood Estates easement document," grandfather said without preamble. "I'd like to see it, please." Stanley's discomfort visibly increased. "Oh, well, those development files are quite extensive. It might take some time to locate the specific—" "Cut the act, Stanley," grandfather interrupted. "Victoria Harrington was waving it around yesterday. Document showing my signature granting an emergency access easement across my property. I want to see it. Now." Stanley swallowed hard, then nodded to his assistant. "Bring the Riverwood Phase 4 expansion folder, please." While we waited, grandfather fixed Stanley with the same penetrating stare that had made witnesses confess on the stand. "How long have you worked with Victoria Harrington, Stanley? How many easements have you helped process without proper verification?" Stanley's face flushed. "Judge, I simply record the documents brought before me, if they appear to be in order." "If they appear to be in order," grandfather repeated slowly. "Tell me, does my signature on that easement appear to be witnessed or notarized?" Before Stanley could answer, his assistant returned with a thick folder. Stanley quickly flipped through it, extracting a document and sliding it across the counter. I leaned in beside grandfather as he examined the paper. It was indeed an easement agreement, granting Riverwood Estates perpetual emergency access across a 20-foot wide corridor of our property. At the bottom was a reasonable facsimile of my grandfather's signature, dated 3 months earlier. "This is a forgery," grandfather said flatly. "And poorly executed at that." He pulled out his wallet and produced his driver's license, laying it beside the document. "Compare the signatures. Stanley." Even to my untrained eye, the differences were obvious once pointed out. The easement signature was close, but missed subtle details in how grandfather formed his R's and connected certain letters. "Furthermore," grandfather continued, "this document lacks proper witnessing and notarization. You know better than to record a document like this affecting real property without proper authentication." Stanley's shoulders slumped. "Judge, you have to understand. Riverwood is bringing a lot of tax revenue to the county. When Ms. Harrington brings in paperwork, we're encouraged to process it expeditiously." "Encouraged by whom?" I asked. Stanley glanced nervously toward the hallway leading to the administrative offices. "I've said too much already." Grandfather reached across the counter and reclaimed the document. "I'm taking this. I suggest you start preparing your statement. Stanley, knowingly recording fraudulent property documents is a felony in this state." As we left the recorder's office, we nearly collided with Mayor Frank Davis rounding the corner. The mayor, a former real estate developer who'd won office on promises of modernizing Riverdale, stopped short when he saw my grandfather. "Judge Walker, what brings you to City Hall today?" His smile was as artificial as the easement document in grandfather's hand. "Frank," grandfather acknowledged coolly, "just investigating some irregularities with property records. Specifically, a forged easement concerning my farm." The mayor's smile faltered only slightly. "Forged? That's a serious accusation. Judge, I'm sure there's a simple explanation." "The explanation," grandfather replied, "is that your friends at Riverwood Estates have resorted to fraud to seize access to my property, and somehow they've convinced the police department to act as their private security force." Mayor Davis glanced around, then lowered his voice. "Let's discuss this in my office. Robert, no need to air grievances in the hallway." "I have nothing to discuss privately," grandfather said. "I'm filing a formal complaint and considering a lawsuit against Riverwood, the city, and everyone involved in this fraud. But first, I'm going to speak with Sheriff Thompson about Officer Benson's misuse of police resources. The mayor's artificial friendliness evaporated. I wouldn't waste the sheriff's time, Judge. Officer Benson's assignment was approved through proper channels. The City Council voted last month to allow supplemental duty assignments for officers, paid for by private entities like the HOA. It's all perfectly legal. Is it legal for those officers to enforce non-existent easements based on forged documents? I asked. Mayor Davis ignored me, focusing on my grandfather. Robert, be reasonable. Riverwood is the future of this town. Their newest phase will bring in millions in tax revenue and create dozens of jobs. Surely we can work something out that benefits everyone. Grandfather held up the fraudulent document. The time for working something out ended when Victoria Harrington decided to forge my signature. Good day. Frank. As we walked away, the mayor called after us. This won't end well for you. Robert. Some battles aren't worth fighting. Sheriff Alan Thompson had known my grandfather for over 40 years. They'd gone fishing together most Sundays during the summer months. And the sheriff had been a pallbearer at my grandmother's funeral. If anyone would listen, it would be him. But when we arrived at the sheriff's office, his deputy informed us he was in meetings all day and suggested we make an appointment for next week. Tell Alan it's Robert Walker, and it's urgent, Grandfather insisted. The deputy disappeared into the back offices, returning a few minutes later, looking uncomfortable. Sheriff says he's tied up with the county budget review all day. He suggested you take any concerns about Riverdale PD to their chief or the mayor's office. Grandfather's jaw tightened. I see. And when did the county budget become more important than investigating document fraud and property theft? The deputy had no answer. By the time we returned home, Officer Benson had been joined by a second police cruiser. Both vehicles were now parked directly on our property, well beyond any claimed easement area, with a small canopy set up between them. The officers had brought lawn chairs and a cooler, creating what amounted to a tailgate party at the entrance to our farm. I pulled up beside them and rolled down my window. You're trespassing on private property. The easement document is a forgery, and we've filed a complaint with the county. The second officer, whose nameplate read Denton, laughed. Is that so? Well, until we receive official orders otherwise, we're maintaining our position here. HOA pays good overtime, and we've been instructed to ensure continuous access. Benson smirked. If you've got a problem with it, call the police. Oh, wait. Both officers chuckled at their own joke. For the next week, the police presence at our driveway became a permanent fixture. Officers rotated shifts, always maintaining at least one cruiser blocking part of our entrance. They began stopping our vehicles each time we entered or left, demanding identification and questioning our purpose, creating delays of 15 to 20 minutes each time. Meanwhile, Grandfather pursued every legal avenue available. He filed complaints with the police department, the district attorney's office, and the state attorney general. He contacted the local newspaper, but the editor who, we later learned, lived in Riverwood Estates, declined to investigate. Calling it a private property dispute, Victoria Harrington began making daily appearances, always accompanied by different members of the Riverwood HOA board. They would stand at our entrance, taking photos and measurements, discussing their plans for improvements within earshot. Construction stakes appeared along our driveway, marking what they claimed would be the new widened access road. The situation escalated when surveyors arrived, escorted by Benson and Denton. When Grandfather confronted them, Benson stepped between them. These gentlemen have permission to be here. Judge, I suggest you go back to your house and let them work. Permission from whom? Grandfather demanded. Not from me, the legal owner of this property. Official city business, Benson replied, hand resting on his taser. Interfere, and I'll have to place you under arrest for obstructing. That night, as we sat on the porch watching lightning flicker across distant storm clouds, my grandfather seemed to have aged years in just days. The fight was taking a toll on him. I never thought I'd see the day, he said quietly, when the law would be used to steal a man's property right in front of him. He took a slow sip from his glass of bourbon, a rare indulgence he allowed himself only in times of deep contemplation. We'll fight this, Grandpa, I assured him. We've got the evidence of forgery. Eventually, someone will listen. He nodded, though his eyes remained fixed on the horizon. Did I ever tell you about my father's run-in with the Tennessee Valley Authority back in '36? I shook my head, sensing a story coming. They wanted to flood part of this farm for a reservoir project. Sent men with papers, just like Victoria and her cronies. My father refused to sell. Grandfather smiled faintly at the memory. One night, TVA surveyors came onto our property without permission. My father confronted them with his shotgun. Not to hurt anyone. Understand. But to make a point about property rights. What happened? I asked. They had him arrested, charged with assault and an obstruction of a federal project. Grandfather's smile grew. But the local judge, a man who understood property rights better than most, threw the case out. Said a man has the right to defend his land against trespassers. Badges or no badges. Thunder rumbled in the distance, closer now. The world's changed. Daniel, these days, money talks louder than justice. Riverwood has money. Victoria has connections. We have... He gestured around at our modest farmhouse. Tradition, history, things people like them don't value. I'd never heard my grandfather sound so defeated. This was a man who had spent his life upholding the law, believing in its power to protect the innocent and punish the guilty. Now that same system was being weaponized against him. There must be someone who can help, I insisted. What about your old colleagues from the bench? Grandfather shook his head. Most have retired or passed on. The new judges are political appointees, more concerned with campaign contributions than constitutional rights. He finished his bourbon and set the glass aside. But I haven't exhausted all options yet. Tomorrow, I'm calling Martha Jenkins. Martha Jenkins was a legend in Tennessee legal circles, a fierce litigator who had argued before the state Supreme Court numerous times and won most of those battles. She had clerked for my grandfather decades ago before building her own practice, specializing in property rights. You think she'll take the case? I asked. Martha owes me a favor, Grandfather said with the first genuine smile I'd seen in days. And she hates bullies even more than I do. The next morning, as rain pattered against the windows, Grandfather spent an hour on the phone with Martha Jenkins. I could only hear his side of the conversation, but from his increasingly animated tone, I gathered she was interested in our situation. When he finally hung up, his eyes had regained some of their spark. Martha's coming tomorrow. Says this is exactly the kind of case she lives for. In the meantime, she suggested we document everything: photographs, videos, detailed notes of every interaction. I grabbed my phone. I'll start right now. The officers should be changing shifts soon. I drove down to the entrance, where Officer Denton was sitting in his cruiser, windshield wipers slapping away the steady rain. I parked nearby and began taking photos of the police presence, the construction stakes, and the arbitrary easement boundaries they'd marked. Denton noticed immediately and stepped out, pulling his rain jacket tight. What do you think you're doing? Documenting police harassment and trespassing on private property, I replied, continuing to take pictures. Public servants in public view have no expectation of privacy. Denton's face darkened. Hand over that phone. No. That wasn't a request, he growled, advancing toward me. You're interfering with police business and creating a safety hazard. I stood my ground. I'm on my own property, photographing individuals who are trespassing. If you touch me or my property without a warrant or probable cause, that's assault. Denton stopped, clearly calculating his options. Without Benson present, he seemed less confident. Delete those photos, or I'll have to place you under arrest. On what charge? He fumbled for a moment. Obstruction, disorderly conduct. For standing on my own property taking photographs, I don't think that will hold up. Officer Denton. Especially not when my grandfather's friend Martha Jenkins files her federal civil rights lawsuit tomorrow. The name dropped like a stone between us. Martha Jenkins' reputation apparently reached even to the Riverdale Police Department because Denton's aggressive posture faltered. "Just stay out of the easement area," he muttered. Retreating to his cruiser, I continued documenting for another 20 minutes before returning to the house. As I showed grandfather the photos, a white SUV pulled into our driveway. Victoria Harrington had arrived for her daily intimidation visit, this time accompanied by a man in a business suit I hadn't seen before. Grandfather watched through the window as they examined something on a tablet, pointing toward our house. "That's Gregory Pearson with her," he said grimly. "County commissioner, and Riverwood's biggest cheerleader on the zoning board. Should we go confront them?" Grandfather shook his head. "Let them posture." Martha advised minimal interaction until she arrives. They're hoping to provoke an incident they can use against us. Throughout the day, more vehicles arrived: another police cruiser, a city works truck, and what appeared to be a small bulldozer on a trailer, parked just off the county road. The message was clear: they were preparing to act, regardless of our protests. That evening, as I prepared dinner, I noticed grandfather was missing from his usual spot in the living room. I checked the porch, his bedroom, even the basement workshop where he sometimes tinkered with old furniture. Nothing. Growing concerned, I walked outside, calling his name. The rain had stopped, leaving everything draped in mist and slowly gathering darkness. That's when I noticed the barn door was ajar, warm light spilling out into the gathering dusk. Our barn was a true bank barn, built into the side of a hill so that the upper level opened to the ground on one side, while the lower level did the same on the opposite side. It housed grandfather's ancient tractor, various farm implements, and decades of accumulated tools. I found him in the lower level, rummaging through old crates stacked against the back wall. His flashlight beam bounced across dusty equipment I hadn't seen before. "Grandpa, what are you looking for?" He didn't turn around, continuing his search. "Insurance policy," he muttered. "Your grandmother made me put it away years ago. Said it was too dangerous to keep in the house." I moved closer, peering into the open crates. One contained old chains and towing equipment. Another held hydraulic tools I didn't recognize. "Here it is," grandfather said with satisfaction, pulling a tarp off a large object in the corner. Beneath the dusty cover sat an old military surplus winch mounted on a reinforced cart with heavy rubber tires. It looked like something from a World War II movie, all steel construction with a hand crank and multiple gearing options. "What exactly is that?" I asked, though I was starting to get an uneasy feeling about his intentions. "PTO-driven vehicle recovery winch," he said, examining it with professional interest. "Army surplus. Your great-uncle brought it back from Germany in '46. We used it for years to pull stumps and move heavy equipment." The winch was attached to a small trailer hitch that could be connected to his tractor. Beside it sat coils of steel cable thick as my thumb. "Grandpa," I said carefully, "what are you planning to do with this?" He finally turned to face me, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen before, not just determination, but a dangerous glint of the same righteous anger that had made him a feared judge for 3 decades. "Martha won't be here until tomorrow afternoon," he said matter-of-factly. "Those bulldozers and police won't wait that long. They're planning to start work in the morning." "How do you know, man? Stanley Perkins called. Seems he's found his conscience. Said Riverwood's crews have permits to begin widening the easement at 7 a.m. Grandfather patted the winch. "This is just a precaution. Daniel, sometimes the law needs a little physical reminder of where boundaries lie." I helped him attach the winch trailer to his tractor, though every instinct told me this was heading somewhere dangerous. By the time we finished, night had fully fallen. The police cruisers remained at our entrance, their presence marked by occasional sweeps of headlights. "Get some sleep," Grandfather advised as we returned to the house. "Tomorrow will be a long day. I tried to sleep, but found myself staring at the ceiling, imagining worst-case scenarios. Around 3 a.m., I heard grandfather's bedroom door open, followed by his careful steps down the hallway. Through my window, I watched him walk toward the barn, flashlight in hand. By the time I pulled on clothes and followed, his tractor was already rumbling to life, headlights illuminating the misty pre-dawn darkness. I ran to catch up, but he was already moving down the back trail that circled around our property, a route that would bring him to the pond near our entrance without using the main driveway. I sprinted through the wet grass, taking a more direct path toward the entrance. As I emerged from the trees near our pond, I saw the police cruisers, 2 of them now parked at awkward angles across our driveway. Both appeared empty, their occupants likely seeking coffee or bathroom breaks before the morning's activities began. Then I spotted grandfather's tractor approaching slowly from the opposite direction, the winch trailer bouncing behind it. He stopped at the edge of the pond, positioning the tractor at a precise angle before dismounting. I rushed over. "Grandpa, what are you doing?" "This is crazy." "This is necessary," he replied calmly, unwinding the steel cable from the winch. "Those cruisers are fully on our property, not even pretending to stay within their fake easement. They've abandoned their vehicles on private property." "So call a tow truck," I hissed. "No tow company in the county would touch a police vehicle," he said, continuing to unspool the heavy cable. "Besides, this sends a clearer message." Before I could argue further, he began dragging the cable toward the nearest police cruiser. For a 78-year-old man, he moved with remarkable stealth and purpose. Within minutes, he had attached the heavy hook to the cruiser's rear axle and returned to the winch. "Grandpa, stop. They'll arrest you for this." He paused, hand on the winch controls. "Daniel, there comes a point when a man has to decide what he's willing to lose. I've spent my life believing in the law, upholding it, defending it. But when the law becomes a weapon for the powerful to take what isn't theirs, a man has to fall back on older principles." He gestured toward the surveyor stakes. "They're stealing our land in broad daylight, using badges and bulldozers instead of guns. What would you have me do? Surrender 200 years of family history because some developer wants a shortcut?" Before I could respond, headlights appeared on the county road, the construction crew arriving early. Simultaneously, I spotted the 2 officers returning from the direction of the gas station down the road, coffee cups in hand. Grandfather saw them too. Without hesitation, he engaged the winch. The cable went taut with a metallic groan, and the police cruiser began to slide backward toward the pond, tires cutting muddy furrows in the wet ground. "Police, stop right there," Officer Benson shouted, dropping his coffee and breaking into a run. But it was too late. The cruiser picked up momentum, sliding faster down the gentle slope. With a tremendous splash, its rear end plunged into the pond, followed quickly by the rest of the vehicle. Within seconds, water was pouring in through the open windows. Officer Denton reached for his radio, presumably to call for backup, while Benson continued sprinting toward us, face contorted with rage. "You're under arrest," he bellowed, reaching for his handcuffs as he approached. Grandfather stood calmly beside his tractor. "For what? Exactly removing an unauthorized vehicle from private property, destruction of police property, obstruction of justice, assault on an officer." Benson was practically frothing as he reached for grandfather's arm. I stepped between them. "Touch him, and we'll add elderly abuse to the civil rights lawsuit being filed today." Benson hesitated, looking from me to grandfather to the cruiser now settling deeper into the pond. Construction workers and what appeared to be Riverwood representatives had stopped at our entrance, watching the scene unfold with shocked expressions. "You've lost your mind, old man," Benson snarled. "You're going to jail for a long time." "Perhaps," grandfather replied evenly. "But not before a very public trial where I explain how Riverwood Estates forged documents to steal my property. and how the Riverdale Police Department acted as their private security force. He nodded toward the gathering crowd. I imagine the media will find that quite interesting, especially with the evidence we've gathered. As if on cue, a black luxury sedan pulled up to the edge of the crowd. Martha Jenkins stepped out, immaculately dressed in a tailored suit despite the early hour. She surveyed the scene with professional interest, her experienced eyes taking in the half-submerged police cruiser, the red-faced officers, and the construction crew frozen in place. "Well," she said, approaching with measured steps, "I see we're starting bright and early. Robert." She handed Benson a thick envelope. "Officer, this is a temporary restraining order signed by Judge Michaels of the Federal District Court, prohibiting any construction, modification, or police action regarding this property pending investigation of serious civil rights violations." Benson stared at the envelope without opening it. "This man just destroyed city property." Martha raised an eyebrow. Did he? Or did the Riverdale Police Department abandon a vehicle on private property outside of any legal easement? A property, I might add, where fraudulent documents have been filed and where officers have engaged in documented harassment of the legal owners. She smiled thinly. "I look forward to exploring these questions in federal court. Where? I should mention, I've already filed a $2 million civil suit this morning naming the city. Riverwood Estates. Victoria Harrington? And Officers Benson and Denton, personally?" The color drained from Benson's face. "We were following orders." "Yes," Martha said coolly. "That defense has historically proven problematic." By noon, the situation had transformed completely. The half-submerged police cruiser had been towed from the pond by the city's own wrecker service. The construction equipment disappeared. Mayor Davis arrived, then quickly left after a closed-door conversation with Martha Jenkins in our living room. By evening, local television crews had arrived, capturing footage of the pond and interviewing grandfather about the forged easement documents. The story quickly expanded as other property owners came forward with similar tales of Riverwood's aggressive tactics and questionable documentation. Within a week, the district attorney launched an investigation into document fraud at the county recorder's office. Victoria Harrington resigned from Riverwood Estates. Mayor Davis announced he wouldn't seek re-election. Officers Benson and Denton were placed on administrative leave pending internal investigation. Martha Jenkins' federal lawsuit proceeded methodically, exposing a web of corruption connecting Riverwood's developers, city officials, and police leadership. The case eventually settled for an undisclosed amount, though the terms included a public apology to my grandfather and a permanent injunction preventing any development on or near our property without explicit court approval. One evening, months later, as we sat on the porch watching fireflies rise from the fields, grandfather seemed more at peace than he had in years. "You know," he said reflectively, "your grandmother always worried that old Winch would get me into trouble someday." I laughed. "I think she'd agree it was finally put to good use." He nodded, smiling. "Property isn't just land, Daniel. It's history, family, legacy. Some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds seem impossible." He gestured toward the pond, now returned to its peaceful state. "Sometimes you have to draw a line and say no further, even if it means sinking a police car." As twilight deepened into night, I thought about the lessons I'd learned watching my grandfather stand his ground. In a world increasingly driven by money and influence, there was still power in simple conviction, in knowing what was right and being willing to defend it, regardless of cost. The old judge had delivered his most important verdict not from a bench, but from the seat of a tractor. And in doing so, he'd reminded an entire town about the principles that truly mattered: justice, honesty, and the fundamental right to protect what's rightfully yours.